I want you to just take a second right now and try to imagine the world we live in today. Like with all of its fractured geopolitical borders, the deeply entrenched ideological camps, and just the sheer volume of screaming that happens every time an election year rolls around.
Oh, yeah. It's deafening, honestly.
Right, it really is. So now I want you to imagine trying to organize a global community of millions of people drawn from almost every single one of those fractured backgrounds.
That sounds like a logistical nightmare.
Exactly. But here is the catch. You have to do it without any of the traditional tools of power.
Okay, what do you mean by traditional tools?
I mean, take away the politicians, take away the campaigns, the attack ads, the, billion-dollar lobbying industries.
Wow, okay.
And while you're at it, take away the clergy, too.
Wait, no clergy at all?
None. No priests, no rabbis, no imams, no pastors standing at a pulpit telling the congregation what to think. Instead, you are going to base this entire functioning global structure on a scriptural foundation of over 21 million words.
I mean, when you lay it out like that, it honestly sounds like an administrative paradox.
Yeah, it really does.
Because you're completely removing the traditional levers of power and control, right? The very mechanisms that human beings have used for millennia to enforce group cohesion. And yet you're relying on this massive, highly specific textual archive to keep a global population moving the exact same direction. In the sociological study of religion, that is usually a recipe for absolute chaos.
Right, because usually when we look at religious history, what happens? Texts inevitably lead to interpretations.
Oh, for sure. And interpretations lead to disagreements.
Exactly. Disagreements lead to schisms, and suddenly over a couple of centuries, you have 1,000 different factions, all claiming to possess the true version of the original message.
Yeah, that's pretty much the standard historical pattern.
But today, you and I are going on a deep dive into a belief system that has fiercely, almost miraculously resisted that splintering. We are looking at the Bahá'í faith.
Which is one of the world's youngest and currently one of the fastest growing independent world religions.
It is. And our map for this exploration is an incredibly comprehensive, heavily researched text by Robert H. Stockman. It's titled Bahá'í Faith, A Guide for the Perplexed.
It's a fantastic source, really thorough.
Yeah, and our mission today is to take Stockman's exhaustive scholarly work and systematically unpack how this religion actually functions on a granular level.
Right, because we want to understand its underlying theology, its daily laws, the deeply dramatic historical crucible it was forged in.
Oh, the history is intense.
It really is. And, the specific administrative structures that currently hold it all together, because you really cannot understand the theology without understanding the history.
Absolutely. And you can't understand the history without grasping their approach to administration. So I want to set the scene for you as we get into this. We are talking about a religion that originated in 19th century Iran.
Which was a highly traditional, deeply religious, and at the time, a somewhat isolated society.
Right. And fast forward to today, it has an estimated 5 to 6 million followers spread across almost every single nation and territory on the globe.
It's massive.
But what really jumped out at me in Stockman's work is this idea that the Baha'i faith is not just a religion of the book in the traditional Abrahamic sense. It is a religion of the books, plural.
Plural, massive plural, actually.
Yeah.
That is a crucial distinction because when you study ancient traditions, whether that's, early Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, or Buddhism, you find that they relied heavily on oral transmission for generations.
Sometimes centuries.
Exactly, sometimes centuries before anything was definitively written down and canonized. But the founders of the Baha'i faith lived in the mid to late 19th century.
Right, the industrial era.
Yeah, this was an era of cheap paper, abundant ink, and dedicated scribes. Consequently, the Baha'i community possesses a documented, authenticated archive of over 84,000 original documents.
That is just wild to me. 84,000.
We are talking about an entire library of primary source guidance. It covers everything from the profound mystical nature of the human soul traversing the afterlife to the highly pragmatic mechanics of setting interest rates in a local economy.
Which honestly begs the question, how do you navigate 21 million words of primary source text without getting completely lost in the weeds?
It's a lot to sift through.
It is. Well, Stockman points out that there is a single central watchword around which all this theology, law, and administration revolves.
Right.
Every single rule, every text, every elected body is pointed like a laser at one ultimate goal, and that goal is unity.
And to fully grasp that, we need to look at the three foundational onenesses that form the bedrock of Bahá'í theology.
Okay, lay them out for us.
So it's the oneness of God, the oneness of religion, and the oneness of humanity.
Got it.
Now, that third point, the oneness of humanity, it's incredibly easy to dismiss as a vague, feel-good spiritual platitude.
Oh, totally. We hear phrases like, we are all one all the time in casual spirituality. Sounds great on a bumper sticker.
Exactly. But in the Baha'i context, it is not a platitude. It is a rigorous, active mandate. The explicit goal is unity in diversity.
And the sources are very clear that this has severe practical implications, right? Like, from its very inception in the 19th century, this focus on human oneness meant the absolute abolition of slavery.
Yes, immediate abolition.
It meant an active, textually mandated effort to dismantle racial and gender prejudices. It meant the pursuit of universal education.
Because if you fundamentally believe that everyone is essentially one, possessing a soul with equal capacity before God, you literally cannot sustain a society built on arbitrary divisions of superiority.
It fundamentally breaks the theology.
Exactly. What I find fascinating here is how the Baha'i texts clearly differentiate between the types of unity they are striving for.
Oh yeah, Stockman outlines this really well.
He does. He explains that there is spiritual unity, which is the ultimate transcendent ideal. This is a selfless, almost sacrificial love where an individual would willingly forfeit their own comfort, wealth, or status for the well-being of someone else.
Which is a beautiful ideal, but, hard to maintain 24/7.
Right, and the texts actually acknowledge human reality. They outline human unity, which is basically pragmatic collaboration.
Okay, so you don't have to be a perfect saint.
No, you don't need to achieve perfect, saintly spiritual unity to start working together functionally. The system is designed to accommodate flawed human beings trying to build something cohesive.
Okay, let's talk about that pragmatic collaboration. Let's say I'm an everyday believer. If there are no priests, no mullahs, no pastors, to interpret the text and tell me what to do, how on earth do we make collective decisions?
Well, the answer Stockman provides is a highly specific process called consultation.
And I want you, the listener, to think about the last time you were in a heated corporate board meeting or a chaotic town hall, or even just arguing with your family over Thanksgiving dinner.
Oh boy, that's a volatile image.
Right. Think about how we normally argue. We come with our idea and we fight for it. But Baha'i consultation has entirely different rules.
It truly is a radical departure from conventional conflict resolution or decision-making. The rules of consultation, as laid out in the texts, require purity of motive, an atmosphere of prayer and respect.
Okay, that sounds nice.
Frank expression of one's views, and this is the most psychologically demanding part, a strict rule of non-advocacy.
Yes. So picture that board meeting. You present an idea. In a normal setting, you are deeply attached to that idea. You lobby for it. You try to persuade the room.
You form coalitions.
Exactly. You feel personally attacked if someone says your idea is flawed. But in Baha'i consultation, the moment an idea leaves your mouth, it no longer belongs to you.
Not at all.
It is entirely severed from your ego. It belongs to the group.
Yes, you are actively encouraged by the sacred text to detach from your own contributions. In practice, this means that later in the same meeting, as new information comes to light, you can actually critique your own original idea without losing face.
Because it's not yours anymore.
Exactly. The goal of the gathering is to discover the truth of a situation, to strip away the ego entirely, and allow the best path forward to emerge from the collective conscience of the group.
I love this, but I have to play devil's advocate here for a second.
Go for it.
So it's like an open source potluck. I bring a dish, set it on the table, and suddenly it's not my dish, it's just part of the meal.
Good analogy.
If someone says, this casserole is way too salty, I'm not supposed to be offended. I'm just supposed to agree, yes, let's add less salt next time.
Right.
But wait, if I don't advocate for my perspective, how do differing opinions survive?
Right.
If everyone is just constantly trying to detach and agree, doesn't this inevitably lead to the most passive form of groupthink? Or what if someone is just inherently loud and dominating?
That is the exact trap most modern consensus-building models fall into. But the Baha'i texts specifically guard against that.
How so?
They explicitly state that the shining spark of truth cometh forth only after the clash of differing opinions.
Oh, wow. The clash of opinions.
Yes, so frank, robust, and honest expression is not just allowed, it is required. The key difference lies entirely in the attachment to the outcome.
I see.
You must present your differing opinions strongly and clearly, but once all the facts and views are laid on the table, the group must decide.
And how do they decide? because if everyone has to detach, someone still has to make a call.
They seek unanimity. If the group consults and reaches a unanimous decision, that is considered the ideal.
Right. But humans are humans.
Exactly. Unanimity isn't always possible. So if they can't agree, a simple majority vote prevails.
Okay, standard majority rules.
But here is the crucial defining part of this entire mechanism. Once that majority decision is made, everyone, and I mean especially the people who fiercely argued and voted against it, must support that decision fully and enthusiastically.
This is where it gets wild. Stockman highlights a specific, fascinating concept from the text on this very point.
The part about being wrong in unity.
Yes.
Yeah.
It basically says that it is better for everyone to unite behind a wrong decision than to be divided while a few people insist on being right.
It's so counterintuitive to how we operate today.
Completely.
Yeah.
Think about the implications of that. If a community agrees on a wrong decision in absolute unity, the negative results will quickly become obvious, right? And because the group is united, they can simply consult again and fix it together.
Exactly.
But if the community is disunited, even if the dissenting faction actually has the objectively correct answer, the resulting friction and infighting destroy the foundation of the community itself. Disunity is considered a far worse evil than making an administrative mistake.
And you see this intense systemic aversion to disunity manifest most clearly in how the Baha'i community conducts its elections.
Oh, let's talk about the elections. This is fascinating.
Right. So the religion is governed by local, national, and international elected councils called spiritual assemblies. Let's look at the mechanics of these elections, because they represent a total inversion of modern democratic norms.
A complete 180.
There are absolutely no nominations.
None.
None. Zero. There is no campaigning, no platforms, no debates about candidates, no attack ads, no electioneering whatsoever.
I want you to really visualize this. If you are an adult Baha'i voter, you gather with your local community once a year. You don't have a ballot with pre-selected names.
Right.
You read prayers to set a deeply spiritual atmosphere. You might read passages from the texts detailing the qualities of leadership, things like unquestioned loyalty, selfless devotion, a well-trained mind, and mature experience. And then absolute silence falls over the entire room.
In that silence, every adult believer consults their own conscience. They mentally review the members of their community, and they independently write down 9 names on a blank piece of paper.
Just off the top of their head.
Exactly. The ballots are collected, and it's a simple plurality. The 9 individuals who receive the most votes are elected to serve on the spiritual assembly.
Wow.
Because there are no parties and no nominations, the voter is completely insulated from pressure, lobbying, or partisan influence.
Yet here's a structural detail from the sources that just blew my mind. What happens if there is a tie?
Oh, the tiebreaker rule.
Yes. Say the 9th and 10th place individuals receive the exact same number of votes. Usually you'd have a runoff election, right?
Sure, yeah.
But in the Baha'i system, if one of those tied individuals represents a minority demographic within that community and the other does not, the minority individual is automatically chosen to serve.
Automatic.
No second round of voting. It is a built-in structural mechanism to ensure that the concept of unity and diversity actually forces diverse representation into the leadership bodies.
It's an incredibly robust system, but it naturally leads us to a massive, pressing question. Let's say this 9-member elected body makes a decision, and an individual believer profoundly, fundamentally disagrees with it.
Sure.
Human nature naturally gravitates toward forming factions. We love to gather like-minded people, form a splinter group, and protest. Given that human nature, how has this religion avoided splintering into thousands of warring sects over the last century and a half?
Right, because let's contextualize this for you. Christianity has roughly 33,000 distinct denominations and sects globally.
A staggering number.
Mormonism, which was founded around the exact same time as the Baha'i faith in the 19th century, has dozens of offshoots and fundamentalist branches. Yet the Baha'i faith has remained staggeringly, almost monolithically unified on a global scale.
It's really unique in that regard.
And Stockman attributes this entirely to one specific structural concept: the covenant.
To understand the Baha'i faith, you have to understand the covenant. It is essentially an ironclad, textually documented chain of succession.
Written down.
Yes. The founder, Baha'u'llah, wrote a specific document in his own hand before his death. In it, he explicitly appointed his eldest son, Abdu'l-Baha, as his sole successor and the infallible interpreter of his words.
So there was no ambiguity.
Exactly, no ambiguity. Decades later, Abdu'l-Baha wrote a will and testament appointing his grandson, Shoghi Effendi, as the guardian of the faith.
Okay.
And all of these figures laid the precise textual groundwork for the ultimate authority, an elected, 9-member international governing body called the Universal House of Justice, which was first elected in 1963.
And here's where we get into the heavy theological weight of this structure. The Universal House of Justice isn't just viewed as a wise group of administrators, right?
No, it goes much deeper than that.
According to Bahá'í theology, while the individual 9 members are normal, fallible human beings, when they consult to make decisions as a body, that institution is considered divinely guided or infallible in all matters that are not already explicitly covered in the 21 million words of Scripture.
That theological designation completely changes the entire dynamic of dissent. Let's go back to our hypothetical believer who strongly disagrees with a policy.
Okay. Yeah.
If you disagree with the Universal House of Justice, it isn't just an administrative grievance like, being mad at your city council. In the Bahá'í context, it becomes a crisis of faith.
Wow.
Now, the system is not a tyranny. You are allowed to appeal decisions. You can write letters, provide new evidence, and appeal an issue all the way from your local assembly up to your National Assembly and finally to the Universal House of Justice itself.
But there are lines you can't cross.
Oh, absolutely. What you cannot do is step outside that channel. You cannot secretly lobby other members. You cannot form a pressure group or a political caucus. And you certainly cannot engage in civil disobedience against the institutions.
And if you do, what if a passionate 49% minority feels the 51% majority is violating the very spirit of the religion? History tells us they split. What happens here?
That brings us to the most severe disciplinary mechanism in the faith, the concept of covenant breaking.
Sounds serious.
It is. If a member crosses that ultimate line, if they actively try to start a rival sect or persistently campaign to undermine and overthrow the legitimate institutions, they are formally declared a covenant breaker.
And what does that mean practically?
The consequence of that designation is absolute. The entire global community is instructed to completely shun them. They cut off all communication, social interaction, and fellowship.
I really want to emphasize this because it sounds incredibly harsh to modern liberal sensibilities. Like, shunning is intense.
It is intense.
But looking at it purely impartially, strictly through a sociological lens as an observer, you have to admit that this mechanism is devastatingly effective at preserving unity. Stockman details several historical attempts to fracture the faith. You had people who tried to break away.
Yes, there are 2 excellent examples to illustrate how and why these schisms fail. Let's look at Ahmad Sohrab in the early 20th century.
Who was he?
He was a prominent Baha'i who essentially wanted to run an independent cultural society in New York. He didn't want to submit his activities to the administrative control of the local Baha'i assembly.
Okay, a power struggle.
Exactly. When he refused to accept their authority and tried to set up a parallel organization, he was declared a covenant breaker. Another example is the so-called Orthodox Baha'i faith, founded by a man named Mason Remey.
Right.
When Shoghi Effendi, the guardian, died in 1957 without appointing a successor, Remey eventually claimed that he should be the second guardian, directly contradicting the explicit textual conditions laid out for succession.
So why didn't these guys succeed in creating massive, lasting schisms like we see in, say, the Protestant Reformation? Why didn't half the community go with them?
Because of the shunning mechanism. Because they were designated as covenant breakers, they were instantly and totally cut off from their primary recruiting base, the main Baha'i community.
So they had no audience.
Exactly. Every devout Baha'i refused to read their literature or listen to their arguments. And think about it from an outsider's perspective. Someone who isn't a Baha'i generally has zero interest in joining a tiny, obscure splinter group whose entire theological identity is based on protesting an internal administrative dispute they know nothing about.
That makes a lot of sense.
As a result, without the oxygen of internal debate or the influx of new converts, these splinter groups historically wither away to almost nothing within a single generation. The sociological quarantine works.
So let's extrapolate this. If partisanship, factionalism, and pressure groups are viewed as fundamentally destructive to the core spiritual goal of unity, how do Baha'is function in modern democracies? I mean, our entire global political system is built on exactly those things.
The short answer is they simply don't engage in partisan politics.
At all.
It is strictly forbidden. A Baha'i cannot join a political party, whether it's the Democrats, the Republicans, the Labor Party, or the Greens. They cannot run for any partisan political office. They cannot donate money to political campaigns.
Wow, that is a huge departure from the norm.
It really is. They are taught to view the multi-party system, which inherently thrives on division, opposition, and a zero-sum game of power, as an outdated roadblock to ultimate global unity.
But they do vote, right?
Yes, they are absolutely required to obey the laws of whatever government they live under, and they can vote in general elections. But they do so by quietly assessing the individual character of candidates, completely refusing to become cogs in the partisan machinery.
Okay, this is a lot to take in. To truly understand why an individual would willingly place such absolute, unwavering trust in this covenant, why an intelligent, modern person would willingly surrender their right to partisan politics or accept the decisions of an elected council as divinely guided, we have to look upward.
Upward.
Yeah, we have to examine the ontological physics of their universe. How do they actually view God, and how does that God communicate with humanity?
Well, that requires us to dive into the deep end of their theology. The Bahá'í conception of God is defined as an unknowable essence.
Unknown.
God is utterly, fundamentally beyond human comprehension. God is beyond gender, beyond time, beyond physical space, and beyond any conceptual framework the human brain can generate. You literally cannot picture God.
Okay.
However, this unknowable essence created what the texts refer to as the primal will, which theologians often compare to the concept of the word or the logos in Christian Greek philosophy.
Oh, like in the Gospel of John.
Exactly. It is this primal will that then generated the physical universe.
Hold on, let me try to explain this so we don't lose anyone, because the philosophy here is dense. It's what scholars call a panentheistic view. Panentheistic, meaning God's attributes are reflected in nature, but nature itself is not God.
Right. It is very important not to confuse it with pantheism.
What's the difference, for those who might not know?
Pantheism says a tree is literally a piece of God. Panentheism says a tree is just a creation that reflects one of God's attributes, like the capacity for growth or beauty or resilience.
Exactly. I want to use an analogy I found really helpful in grasping this. Let's talk about the mirror.
Oh, that's a classic Bahá'í analogy.
Yeah. So if God, the unknowable essence, is the sun up in the sky, you can't look directly at the sun. It will blind you. It is too massive, too intensely radiant. Now, the physical universe, rocks, plants, animals, these are like objects on the ground. A rock might have a slight sheen. It reflects a tiny fraction of the sun's light. An animal reflects a bit more, maybe the attributes of instinct or affection.
Right.
Human beings possess the potential to reflect all of the divine attributes: mercy, justice, love, intellect. But we are like dusty, imperfect mirrors. We distort the light.
That is a perfect setup, because the core of Bahá'í theology is that every so often, the unknowable essence produces a being who acts as a perfectly polished, flawless mirror. The texts call them the manifestations of God.
And who are they?
This includes figures we recognize from world history: Abraham, Moses, Zoroaster, Buddha, Krishna, Jesus, Muhammad, the Bab, and Baha'u'llah. When you look at one of these manifestations, you are looking into a perfect mirror. You see the sun flawlessly reflected in all its glory. Now, the mirror is not literally the sun. Jesus is not the unknowable essence itself. But the reflection is so perfect that to hear the mirror speak is to hear the sun speak.
And this brings us to what I think is one of the most brilliant, intellectually satisfying concepts in the faith progressive revelation.
It's a game changer for comparative religion.
It really is. It's the idea that spiritual truth is absolute. Things like love, compassion, justice, they never change. But social laws are relative to the time and place. God doesn't just speak once, hand down a book, and go silent for eternity.
No, it's continuous.
Right. Instead, God sends a new manifestation whenever humanity reaches a new stage of maturity, continuously updating the social laws according to our evolving capacity.
It's an evolutionary view of religion.
And it answers a question that trips up a lot of people who study comparative religion. If all these religious founders, Moses, Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, are essentially teaching the same core truth from the same one God, why do the rituals, the daily rules, and the societal laws of the world's religions look so drastically different and often contradict each other?
Like, why do some religions require fasting while others don't? Why do dietary laws conflict?
Exactly.
I know you love analogies. How do you usually reconcile that concept when you're reading this material?
Well, I always think of progressive revelation like a school curriculum. You don't teach calculus to a first grader, you teach them basic addition.
Right, they wouldn't understand calculus.
And it's not that addition is somehow wrong once they get to high school. It's just that their intellectual capacity has evolved, so you update the curriculum with algebra and eventually calculus. The teacher is essentially the same, The underlying logic of mathematics is identical, but the lesson is explicitly tailored to the age and capacity of the student.
It's a strong analogy, but to make it perfectly align with Bahá'í historical views, you have to imagine that the students keep forgetting the curriculum over summer break, or the textbooks get corrupted over centuries of translation.
Ah, okay.
Humanity in the tribal era of Moses needed vastly different social laws, like an eye for an eye to establish basic justice, than humanity in the time of Muhammad, or the globalized humanity of today. Each manifestation restores the forgotten spiritual truths and updates the social laws.
That makes total sense.
And what makes the Bahá'í revelation uniquely distinct from the ones that came before it is the sheer physical reality of how it was recorded. We touched on this earlier, but we aren't dealing with oral traditions passed down around a campfire for 300 years before a council decided what was canon.
No, we are dealing with a staggering volume of instantly recorded written text. The founder, Baha'u'llah, had a personal secretary named Mirza Akhajan, and the historical sources describe Baha'u'llah pacing the room, dictating divine revelation so intensely and so fast that Akhajan's handwriting degraded into this furious shorthand.
The descriptions of this are incredible.
Witnesses said it looked like someone had dipped a lock of hair in ink and just dragged it erratically across the page. He was producing up to 100 pages a night of incredibly dense, poetic Arabic and Persian text.
And because it was instantly written down, sealed, and authenticated by Baha'u'llah himself, it structurally removes a lot of the ambiguity that historically leads to theological schism.
No room for arguments over what he meant.
Exactly. You don't have theologians hundreds of years later debating what the founder actually meant in a specific parable because you have the original unalterable document. But we have to ground this. The grand cosmic theology of these perfectly polished mirrors, this massive outpouring of 21 million words, it all exists for a singular, highly practical purpose: to educate humanity.
Okay, so let's get into that. We must ask the grounding question. How does an individual Baha'i actually practice this day to day? What is the path of individual transformation?
According to Stockman's analysis of the texts, the entire underlying purpose of this physical life is to develop spiritual attributes like love, compassion, patience, generosity.
Okay.
The sources use a beautiful evocative metaphor. This physical world is essentially a womb. Just as a physical fetus grows eyes and limbs in the womb that it cannot actually use until it is born into this world, we are currently in this physical realm growing spiritual limbs that we will desperately need when our soul is born into the next life.
Wow, that's a fascinating way to look at it.
But to develop those spiritual muscles, to grow those spiritual limbs, you cannot just sit around having vague, positive thoughts. There are strict daily obligations.
What kind of obligations?
For instance, adult Baha'is must perform one of 3 obligatory prayers every single day. They can choose between a short, medium, or long prayer. When they recite this prayer, they must physically turn their bodies toward the Qibli, which is the tomb of Baha'u'llah, located in the city of Acre in modern-day Israel.
Okay, so a specific geographic direction.
Yes. They are also required to sit quietly each day, physically wash their face and hands in ablution, and repeat the phrase, Allahu Abha, which translates to, God is most glorious, exactly 95 times.
Now, I have to admit, when I was first reading through this section, I felt a distinct sense of friction.
How so?
On the one hand, this religion sounds incredibly progressive and modern, abolishing the clergy, championing absolute gender equality, advocating for a global parliament and international currency.
Really modern, yeah.
But on the other hand, being legally required to recite a specific Arabic phrase exactly 95 times and strictly facing a specific geographic city in the Middle East to pray feels very traditional, almost ancient. It feels like a throwback. How do they reconcile this intensely modern worldview with such ancient-feeling rituals?
It speaks to the profound balance of faith and works that Stockman highlights throughout the book. Baha'u'llah explicitly stated in his writings that recognizing the manifestation of God and obeying his laws are twin inseparable duties. One is not acceptable without the other.
So they go hand in hand.
Completely. You cannot just cultivate abstract, warm, spiritual feelings. You need rigorous physical discipline. The repetition of 95, the physical orientation toward a specific point on the compass, the act of washing with water, these are physical anchors.
Anchors, I like that.
They are intentional designed to brutally disrupt your mundane, secular day and force a moment of literal, bodily connection to the mystical reality of God.
It's physical training for the soul. And speaking of physical training, there is also the law of the 19-day fast.
Yes, a very intense period.
Every year, from March 2nd to March 20th, healthy adult Baha'is abstain entirely from food, drink, and smoking from sunrise to sunset. It is a period of intense spiritual recalibration. There is also the institution of pilgrimage, where believers travel to Haifa and Acre to visit the holy sites and view relics of the founders.
Though it is highly important to note how they view those relics because it differs from other traditions.
So,
Unlike some medieval religious practices where physical relics like a bone or a piece of wood were believed to possess magical, talismanic, curing properties, Baha'i relics are viewed differently. If they view a lock of Baha'u'llah's hair or a piece of his clothing, it is purely for spiritual inspiration and emotional, historical connection.
so no seeking miraculous healings from a piece of cloth.
Exactly. It's about drawing the heart closer to the reality of the manifestation, not seeking a physical miracle.
And this intense discipline extends deeply into strict moral laws. There is an absolute prohibition on alcohol and mind-altering drugs.
Yes, zero tolerance for that.
There is a strict, highly emphasized prohibition on gossip, backbiting, and slander, which the texts call the worst of all human traits because it extinguishes the light of the heart and destroys unity.
Which ties right back into that core theme of unity.
Right. There is also a strict law against sexual relations outside of heterosexual marriage. But Stockman makes an incredibly interesting point here regarding the psychology of these laws.
Yeah, the concept of sin is quite different.
Exactly. The Baha'i texts focus much less on the Christian concept of sin as a permanent damning stain on the soul, and much more on the idea of spiritual growth, of constantly taking the right fork in the road to move closer to God.
If we want to see how these laws actually function, look at how they approach marriage. It is a perfect, fascinating synthesis of their progressive and traditional principles.
Let's hear it.
The law completely abolishes the ancient, deeply rooted Middle Eastern practice of arranged marriages. The couple must freely, independently choose each other.
Very modern.
However, once they make that independent choice, they must acquire the formal written permission of all living biological parents in order to actually marry.
Which, if you think about modern family dynamics, can be a massive hurdle. What if a parent is estranged or holds a prejudice?
It is a massive hurdle, but the texts explain the mechanism behind the law. It is designed to ensure family unity. Marriage is not viewed merely as a contract between two autonomous individuals. It is the fundamental knitting together of two entirely different families.
It forces them to the table.
Exactly. It forces the families to consult, to resolve prejudices, and to build a unified foundation for the couple. They also require a symbolic dowry. Not a massive financial transaction meant to purchase a bride, but a highly specific, relatively small amount of gold or silver that the husband is required to give the wife.
Symbolizing a spiritual and material commitment to support the family unit.
Yes.
This perfectly brings us to a crucial, expanding realization in our deep dive. All of this individual spiritual discipline, the exact phrasing of the prayers, the fasting, the stringent marriage laws, none of it is meant to stay isolated within the individual.
Right. It's not a solitary pursuit.
The transformation of the individual is merely the raw fuel for the transformation of society. This religion does not just want good people. It has its sights set on building what the texts explicitly call an ever-advancing civilization.
And you cannot build a civilization without labor. In the Baha'i faith, the concept of work is elevated to the exact same spiritual status as worship.
Earning a livelihood is a form of prayer.
Literally, yes. Creating a piece of art or simply sweeping a floor to the absolute best of your ability, if it is done in a spirit of service to humanity, it is considered prayer.
And interestingly, inherited wealth does not excuse you from this obligation. Everyone, regardless of their bank account, is expected to work and contribute. But I want to pause and look at something we almost skipped over from Stockman's analysis regarding work and family.
Okay, what did we miss?
The texts explicitly elevate the role of homemaking and child-rearing to an incredibly honorable, spiritually vital form of work. It is not secondary. Furthermore, they strictly prohibit begging as a means of livelihood, placing the onus on the community to provide avenues of work.
Yeah, that community responsibility is key.
But here is the most striking law regarding the family. If a family is poor and can only afford to educate one of their children, the Baha'i texts explicitly mandate that priority must go to the daughter.
That is a staggering sociological mandate for a religion born in the 19th century Middle East.
Truly staggering.
The logic provided in the text is that women are the first educators of the next generation. If you educate a boy, you educate an individual. If you educate a girl, you educate a family, and by extension, you educate the bedrock of civilization itself.
But obviously, the purpose of work is not mindless, rapacious consumerism. This is where their approach to macroeconomics comes into play. They don't advocate for entirely dismantling capitalism, nor do they advocate for establishing state communism.
No, they seek a middle ground.
Right. They seek to essentially spiritualize the economic system. The texts advocate strongly for profit sharing between employers and employees, highly graduated taxation, and the absolute systemic elimination of both grotesque, extreme wealth and grinding, extreme poverty.
And they put their theological money where their mouth is through a foundational law called hukuwala, which translates from Arabic as the right of God.
How does that work?
This is a wealth tax set precisely at 19% on an individual's surplus income.
I have to stop and ask. Why 19%? It seemed like such a random specific number. Why not a clean 20%?
It's not random at all in their theological framework. The number 19 is highly sacred in the Bahá'í faith.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The Bahá'í calendar consists of 19 months, each containing exactly 19 days. In the Arabic Abjad system, where letters have numerical values, the word wahid, which means unity or oneness, has a numerical value of exactly 19.
Wow, so the math literally equals unity.
Exactly. So paying 19% is a numerical reinforcement of the concept of unity. Now, surplus income means the wealth left over after all essential living expenses, housing, and basic needs are paid. It is a tax strictly on excess.
Okay, that makes sense.
And crucially, it is completely voluntary in practice. There is no central Bahá'í IRS. No one comes to audit your bank accounts. It is a spiritually mandated payment made directly to the universal house of justice, relying entirely on the believer's conscience.
And what do they do with the funds?
It's used to fund the global administration, maintain holy places, and support massive charitable and developmental works worldwide.
This financial, spiritual, and administrative engine culminates visually in something incredibly striking. The Mashriq al-Adkar, or the House of Worship.
They are beautiful buildings.
If you've ever seen pictures of these, there's a famous one in Wilmette, Illinois, outside Chicago, and others in India, Chile, Uganda. They are breathtaking, 9-sided buildings. But what happens inside them is entirely unique.
Right, because there are no sermons.
None. They are completely, profoundly silent regarding sermons. No clergy stand up to speak. Only the Holy Scriptures of the Baha'i faith, alongside the scriptures of all other recognized world religions, are read or sung, and it is entirely a cappella. No instruments are allowed inside.
It's a literal space where the profound spiritual ideals and the pragmatic architecture of the faith meet. But to what ultimate end? Where is all this social engineering and spiritual discipline actually pointing?
What's the end game?
The sources outline two major, sweeping historical stages that the community is actively working toward. The first is what they call the lesser peace.
The lesser peace, okay.
This is a political, largely secular peace. It envisions a world where national governments finally realize that war is economically and socially ruinous. This leads them to subordinate their national sovereignty to a global parliament, backed by a system of collective international security, a universal auxiliary language taught in all schools, and a unified global currency.
And then, following the establishment of the lesser peace, perhaps centuries down the line, is the ultimate evolutionary goal of the religion, the most great peace.
Yes.
This is a civilization where the world is not just politically unified by begrudging treaties and fear of war, but is deeply spiritually unified by a shared, profound understanding of humanity's divine purpose. It is essentially the realization of the kingdom of God on earth, achieved through human maturation.
But this grand, sweeping, highly optimistic vision of global governance and spiritual harmony wasn't born in a vacuum, and it certainly wasn't born peacefully.
No, not at all.
It was forged in an incredibly dramatic, extraordinarily bloody, historical crucible. To really grasp the gravity of this faith and why its followers are so devoted, we have to rewind the clock. We have to trace its evolution over the last 180 years, starting in the year 1844 in the heart of Shiite Iran.
Let's do it. The history officially begins with a young merchant known as the Bab, a title which translates to the gate. In 1844, in the city of Shiraz, the Bab declared a revolutionary, earth-shattering mission.
He wasn't just another reformer.
No, he claimed to be an independent manifestation of God, the prophesied Qaim that the Shiite Muslim world had been awaiting for 1,000 years. He wrote massive complex texts, most notably the Qayyum-ul-Azma and the Persian Bayan, and in doing so, he fundamentally aggressively abrogated Islamic law.
We have to explain exactly how he abrogated Islamic law, because that is what triggered the apocalypse for his followers.
Set the stage for us.
In 19th century Iran, the Islamic clergy, the mullahs, held absolute, unquestioned power over every aspect of daily life, law, and salvation. The foundational doctrine of Islam is that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets, the final messenger of God until the literal day of judgment.
So no more messengers after Muhammad.
Right. By claiming to be a new messenger with a new book, the Bab was entirely breaking that seal. But he went further. He explicitly altered the direction of prayer away from Mecca. He rewrote the deeply entrenched laws regarding marriage, divorce, and inheritance. He essentially declared the entire Islamic dispensation fulfilled and therefore legally superseded.
But the clerical establishment, this wasn't just heresy. It was a cosmic rebellion. The message was unimaginably radical. The Bab was essentially preparing the way for someone even greater, a divine figure he cryptically referred to as he whom God shall make manifest.
And the establishment fought back hard.
Brutally, his movement faced terrifying state-sponsored persecution. Thousands of his followers, who were called Babis, were tortured, hunted down, and killed in the streets. And in 1850, the Bab himself was executed by a massive firing squad of 750 soldiers in the public square of Tabriz.
It was an attempt to utterly extinguish the movement. Among the prominent followers of the Bab was a wealthy nobleman from Tehran who had given up his immense family wealth and court positions to support the dangerous new cause.
Oh, how?
Yes. His title was Baha'u'llah, which translates to the glory of God. In the terrifying, bloody crackdowns immediately following the Bab's execution, Baha'u'llah was arrested. He was thrown into the Black Pit of Tehran, which was a horrific subterranean dungeon originally built as an underground reservoir.
It's like a nightmare.
It was completely dark, freezing, filled with knee-deep filth, and he was weighed down by chains so heavy they scarred his neck for the rest of his life. It was there, amidst the darkness and the impending threat of execution, that he experienced the profound, mystical stirrings of his own divine revelation.
Miraculously, due to his family's lingering political connections, he survived the Black Pit. But he was stripped of all his properties, his wealth was confiscated, and he was exiled from Iran to Baghdad.
And it's hard to overstate the physical and psychological resilience required here.
Absolutely. You have a man who spends the next 40 years of his life as an exile and a state prisoner. He is moved by the Ottoman and Persian empires from Baghdad to Istanbul, to the brutal winters of Edirne, and finally to the bleak, disease-ridden prison city of Acre in Ottoman Palestine.
40 years as a prisoner.
Yes. Yet, while in constant exile, while constantly under the threat of assassination, he somehow manages to write those 21 million words, dictating an intricately detailed blueprint for global governance, theology, and law.
And the pivotal moment in all of this came in 1863. During a period of 12 days in a garden outside Baghdad, a period now celebrated as the Festival of Ridvan Baha'u'llah formally declared to his closest followers that he was, in fact, the promised one foretold by the Bab.
He whom God shall make manifest.
Exactly. This declaration sparked a massive theological evolution for the remaining Babi community. He began writing monumental texts to clarify the theology. For instance, there is an amazing story regarding the Kitab-i-Quran, the Book of Certitude.
Oh, this is a great story.
The Bab's own uncle was deeply skeptical of Baha'u'llah's claims. He presented a series of complex theological questions. In response, Baha'u'llah revealed the entire Kitab-i-Quran, a dense, masterfully argued text that completely lays out the logic of progressive revelation and the metaphorical interpretation of biblical and Quranic prophecy in just 2 days and 2 nights.
And the uncle read this text and was completely converted. It's such an amazing historical detail. The text was so profoundly logical, so deeply knowledgeable, that it flipped a skeptical family member into a devoted believer.
That's the power of the text we were talking about earlier.
Right. Later in his exile, Baha'u'llah wrote the Kitab-i-Aqdas, the most holy book, which officially laid down the specific laws for this new era, the prayers, the fasting, the elections, and permanently, textually, abolished the institution of the clergy.
So, when he finally passed away in 1892, still officially a prisoner under house arrest in the vicinity of Acre, he had firmly established the theological and legal bedrock of the faith.
But as any architect will tell you, a blueprint is just paper until someone actually coordinates the labor to build a house. Upon Baha'u'llah's passing, leadership transitioned perfectly, without a successful schism, according to his explicitly written covenant, to his eldest son, Abdul-Baha.
And Abdul-Baha's ministry, which lasted from 1892 to 1921, was entirely defined by taking this obscure, fiercely persecuted Middle Eastern religion and carefully translating its message onto the global stage.
Abdul-Baha is a genuinely fascinating historical figure. To Baha'is, he's considered the perfect exemplar of how a human being should live, the flawless reflection of his father's teachings in human action. He personally oversaw the initial fragile spread of the faith to Western Europe and North America.
And after being freed from the prison city following the Young Turk Revolution, he embarked on an extended tour.
His 1912 tour of North America is absolutely legendary within the community. He was an elderly Middle Eastern man in flowing robes, traveling across America, challenging deep-seated societal norms left and right.
He was incredibly bold.
He stood up in prominent pulpits in universities and advocated fiercely for women's suffrage. He warned with eerie, chilling accuracy of the impending catastrophic disaster of World War I.
And he actively tackled the most toxic, deeply entrenched issue in American society: racism.
This part is incredible.
In 1912, he didn't just speak about racial equality, he actively orchestrated it. He fiercely encouraged the interracial marriage of Louis Gregory, a very prominent African-American lawyer, and Louisa Matthew, a white British woman.
You have to understand the stakes here. At the time he was encouraging this, their marriage was a felony.
Yes.
It was legally classified as miscegenation and was illegal in more than half of the United States. He was taking the high-minded theological concept of the oneness of humanity and forcing it into a practical, highly controversial, legally dangerous reality.
When Abdu'l-Baha passed away in 1921, the mechanisms of the covenant activated once again. His will and testament appointed his grandson, Shoghi Effendi, a young man who was studying at Oxford University at the time, as the guardian of the faith.
And Shoghi Effendi's 36-year ministry fundamentally, structurally changed the machinery of the religion. He systematically transitioned it from a community that revolved around charismatic, living holy figures into a highly institutionalized, deeply systematized administrative order.
Shoghi Effendi was uniquely suited for this incredibly difficult transition. His Oxford education allowed him to translate Baha'u'llah's major texts into elegant, majestic, Shakespearean-level English,
Giving the growing Western believer base direct access.
Exactly, direct, unmediated access to the deep theology. But far more importantly, he meticulously built the physical and administrative structures. He spent decades painstakingly organizing the local and national spiritual assemblies globally, literally laying the exact administrative track upon which the Universal House of Justice would eventually run.
But then, in 1957, disaster seemingly struck. Shoghi Effendi passed away completely unexpectedly while in London.
Without appointing an heir.
Right. He had no children. And crucially, because of the strict textual constraints placed on who could be appointed, he hadn't appointed a successor guardian. This was unequivocally the most critical, dangerous transition in the history of the faith. How does a religion built entirely, structurally, on a continuous chain of infallible succession survive when the central chain seemingly breaks?
It survived because the blueprint was already fully drawn and widely understood by the community. The texts of Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Baha had already explicitly authorized the Universal House of Justice as the supreme, infallible governing body.
The track was laid. The train just needed to be assembled.
Exactly. After a brief, highly disciplined stewardship period managed by a group of widely respected senior believers called the Hands of the Cause, the first Universal House of Justice was successfully elected in 1963. It was elected by the members of all 56 national spiritual assemblies that existed around the world at that time.
And under the guidance of the Universal House of Justice, the modern era of the faith truly takes off. The demographics of the religion shifted massively. The community grew from around 400,000 believers in the 1960s to the millions we see today.
Massive growth.
And this growth was largely driven by explosive, almost overwhelming expansion in the global south, in places like rural India, sub-Saharan Africa, and Latin America.
To manage this massive, unprecedented influx of incredibly diverse populations, many of whom were illiterate or living in highly varied cultural contexts, the House of Justice had to systematize the religion's approach to education and growth.
Which brings us to the current era.
Right. Moving into the current epoch, starting around 1996, they instituted a global culture of learning aimed at what they call entry by troops. They intentionally shifted the community away from traditional ad hoc mass teaching methods and adopted a highly organized, universally applicable curriculum developed by an organization called the Rui Institute.
Okay, we absolutely have to talk about the Rui Institute because looking at it from an organizational standpoint, it is a brilliant mechanism.
It really is.
It's a sequenced educational curriculum, starting with Book 1 and moving sequentially through higher numbers, that focuses explicitly on training every day lay believers to independently run core activities in their own neighborhoods.
And those activities are specific.
Very specific. Children's spiritual education classes, junior youth empowerment groups for teenagers, devotional prayer gatherings, and adult study circles.
By utilizing this specific standardized curriculum, the Universal House of Justice essentially created a decentralized, highly resilient global educational network. Whether you are a believer living in a remote rural village in Colombia, a high-rise apartment in Tokyo, or a sprawling suburb in Chicago, you are studying the exact same sequence of books.
You are learning the exact same skills for community building, rooted in the exact same textual theology. I used the analogy of a corporate franchise earlier, but it really fits the organizational dynamic here. It's a spiritually driven franchise model that ensures incredibly tight quality control and theological unity across drastically different cultures and languages.
But Stockman makes a point to note that there were definitely growing pains.
Oh, I imagine so.
Older believers who are used to a much more casual book club style of community life from the 70s and 80s sometimes deeply struggle to adjust to this new, highly metric-driven, aggressively systematized approach to community building.
Yet it was precisely this intense systematization and administrative capacity that allowed the community to survive and even thrive despite severe modern crises. The most prominent example of this resilience is in post-1979 Iran.
Following the Islamic Revolution.
Yes, following the revolution, the Bahá'í community faced intense, violent state-sponsored persecution. Their democratically elected leadership councils were arrested and executed. Their youth were strictly banned from attending any national universities.
They were trying to strangle the intellectual life of the community.
Exactly. And in response, they utilized their deep administrative capacity to create the Baha'i Institute for Higher Education, the BIH. It is an entirely underground, fully functional, highly rigorous university system operating in living rooms and over secure internet connections across Iran, supported by volunteer professors worldwide.
It is a profound, incredibly moving testament to the resilience of their structure. They didn't violently revolt. They simply built a parallel institution of learning.
So what does this all mean for us? Let's bring all these complex threads together. Over the last hour or so, we've explored a religion that blends incredibly deep mystical theology, the concept of the panentheistic God, the perfect mirrors of the manifestations, the eternal journey of the soul growing limbs in the womb of this world, with brutally, ruthlessly pragmatic social mechanics.
Exactly. You have the rigid rules of consultation designed specifically to kill the human ego. You have the ironclad text of the covenant designed specifically to kill the human instinct for schism.
And you have the Rui Institute designed to democratize education and enforce unity of thought.
The Baha'i faith is not just proposing a pleasant, peaceful, global civilization in theory. It is actively, systematically trying to build the working prototype of that civilization within its own community borders.
And that brings us to the ultimate takeaway for you listening to this right now. The truly unique value proposition of the Baha'i faith in the landscape of world religions isn't just that it believes in unity. Lots of groups, movements, and philosophies believe in unity.
Unity is a common buzzword.
The critical difference is its rigorous, institutionalized, textually mandated defense against disunity. By entirely eliminating the clergy, by strictly banning all forms of partisan political involvement, and by establishing an elected leadership model explicitly mandated by their own sacred primary source texts, they have built a nearly impenetrable fortress around their community.
They clearly recognize that human nature instinctively leans toward fracture, tribalism, and ego, so they designed an operating system where the traditional incentives and tools for factionalism are simply removed from the table entirely.
Which leaves us with a truly fascinating thought experiment to mull over. At the start of this deep dive, I asked you to imagine removing the levers of power we are so accustomed to, the partisanship, the relentless political campaigns, the dictating clergy. The Baha'i texts look forward to a lesser peace and a most great peace spanning centuries into the future. So imagine humanity 1,000 years from now, as those texts so confidently do, if a global society successfully permanently eliminated all partisan politics, all clergy, and all arbitrary national borders, relying entirely on local and global consultative councils and the absolute, agreed-upon harmony of science and religion. What would the daily, mundane life of an average citizen actually look like?